If you are listening to this, then I have already won. And believe me, the taste of victory, after years of swallowing dust and bitter disappointment, is sweeter than any peach pie my late husband George ever baked. For a long time, they saw me as nothing more than a frail, silver-haired shadow, a harmless obstacle to their golden future. They thought I was blind, I was slow, and most importantly, they thought I was stupid. But there is a secret to being an old woman in a big cold house, especially when the wolves come knocking. You learn to watch the shadows, you learn to listen to the silence, and you learn to make the waiting itself your sharpest weapon. Before you scroll past, pause for just a moment. Check to see if you have subscribed to the Grand Dame's Grimoire, and tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from? I want to know exactly how far the echoes of justice, served ice cold, truly travel. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 72 years old, and for the last 4 years I have lived a life meticulously designed by my son, Arthur, and his wife, Serafina. It's a life that looks perfectly serene from the outside. A quiet, respectable home in the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina, a place where Spanish moss hangs from ancient oak trees like silver lace. But the serenity was a cage, woven of neglect and greed. It started subtly, as these things often do. Arthur, my only child, had been the light of my life since the day he was born. He was all I had left after George passed away 10 years ago. George had left me comfortable, not wealthy but stable. The house, our house, was paid off, and there was a substantial portfolio of investments, all earmarked for my old age, and eventually, for Arthur. When he married Serafina, a woman with eyes the color of iced gin and a smile that rarely reached them, I tried to be happy for him. She was a modern woman, a real estate agent with ambition I could smell from across the room. I was prepared to love her, truly, like a daughter. For the first few years they lived in the city, but then Arthur came to me with a plan. "Mom," he said, holding Serafina's hand, his voice thick with what I now recognize as practiced sincerity. "This house is too big for you. It's too much work. Serafina and I want you to move in with us. We want to be there for you, take care of you. We'll sell your house, of course, and use the funds to build an addition to ours, a beautiful, private suite just for you." I should have known then. The word sell was the snake in the garden. This house was my sanctuary. The very air smelled of George's pipe tobacco and the lemon verbena I grew in the garden. But Arthur looked so earnest, and Serafina kept patting my arm, her touch like a dry, cool leaf. They spoke of family and security and loving care. I was alone and a little lonely, and their promises were a warm blanket on a cold night. I agreed. I signed the papers. The sale of my home, a prime historic property, yielded a handsome sum, enough to comfortably finance the addition and then some. I watched as the money went into a joint account with Arthur's name on it, for ease of management, he'd explained. The addition they built at their house, a modern, sprawling monstrosity in the suburbs, was not a beautiful suite. It was a single small room on the ground floor, right next to the laundry room, with a window that faced a brick wall. It was functional, I suppose, but the air felt thin and the light was always gray. And the loving care? It vanished the moment my signature dried on the last transfer paper. My life became a routine of calculated minimums. Serafina stopped asking me to join them for dinner, preferring to eat at 7 while I had my small, pre-prepared meal in my room at 5. She controlled the thermostat, always just a bit too cool for my old bones. My television watching was limited to 2 hours in the evenings. "So as not to drive up the electric bill, Eleanor," she'd say, using my first name like a reprimand. Arthur, my son, was the deepest cut. He became an echo of his wife, nodding along to her dismissive comments. He worked long hours at his consulting firm. Serafina always made sure to remind me that he was the main provider now, and when he was home, he was too exhausted to talk. Our conversations became clipped, utilitarian. "Did you take your pills, Mom? Is there anything you need?" Never, "How are you, Mom?" "Tell me about your day." I endured it, telling myself it was temporary, that they were stressed, that I should be grateful. This went on for 3 years. 3 years of being the unwanted guest, the inconvenience they had purchased with my own money. Then came the fall. A simple trip down a poorly lit hallway at night. I tripped on a loose rug Serafina had insisted on keeping, hit my head hard on the corner of the wall, and woke up in the hospital with a splitting headache and a diagnosis of a severe concussion. The doctor was kind, but his voice sounded distant, like I was listening through a thick layer of cotton. He explained in writing that the trauma might cause temporary, profound hearing loss. I nodded, pretending to understand, though panic was starting to curdle in my stomach. Deaf, even for a few weeks. The world would be muted. Serafina and Arthur were models of concern in the hospital. Serafina co-opted the role of devoted caretaker with a terrifying professionalism. She fielded calls from worried friends, wrote updates on social media about the fragility of life, and insisted on personally feeding me every spoonful of bland broth. She wrote me notes filled with saccharine sweetness. "Don't worry, dearest Eleanor. We are here. We will take care of everything." It felt like a performance for an audience of one, the hospital staff. When I was finally released and returned to their house, my world was silent. I moved through my small room like a ghost. Serafina set up a large whiteboard for communication, and she continued her elaborate show. She'd hug me tightly in front of Arthur, or a visiting neighbor, her face a mask of tender concern. The moment we were alone, the mask would drop. Her eyes would turn cold, and she'd scribble a curt note. "Dinner is in the fridge. Heat it yourself, or don't bother me. I have a showing." The loss of my hearing wasn't just silence. It was a profound loneliness. I couldn't hear the comforting sound of the refrigerator humming, the ticking of my own antique clock, or even my own footsteps. It was a void. But in that void, I started to become a better observer. When a sense is lost, the others sharpen. I watched Serafina's lips, her hands, the minute shifts in her facial muscles, and I waited. 3 weeks to the day since the accident, I woke up before dawn. It was still dark, a deep velvety black outside my window. I lay there rigid, listening to the silence. And then I heard it. A faint rhythmic ticking. I froze, I strained my ears. It was the soft tick-tock of the old cuckoo clock in the hallway, the one I hadn't heard for 21 days. The sound was so delicate, so fragile, I worried it would break. A tremor ran through me. I moved my head on the pillow. The gentle swoosh of the cotton against my ear was clear. My own breath, a steady, low rush, filled my head. My hearing was back. Completely, perfectly back. A wild, almost maniacal sense of elation rushed through me. I could talk. I could call Arthur. I could finally tell them the refrigerator was making that strange clicking noise again. I was halfway out of bed, my feet on the cold, polished wood floor, when the elation was stopped short by a sound coming from the kitchen below. It was Serafina's voice. Sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of the sweet tone she used when writing on the whiteboard. I crept to my door, my heart now a dull, heavy drum in my chest. I opened it just a crack. My small room was close to the main kitchen area, and the sound carried easily up the air vent. Serafina was on the phone, her voice lowered, but every word was a bullet to my newly returned sense. "Honestly, Celeste, I can't take much more of this." I stopped breathing. Celeste was her sister, the one she spoke to every morning. I had seen her lip-syncing for weeks. The old witch just sits there, staring at the wall. You'd think an actual concussion would knock some sense into her. But no, just another excuse for Arthur to leave work early and check on his mother. It's exhausting, the performance. A coldness that had nothing to do with the thermostat settled over me. Old witch. Performance. I pressed my ear closer to the crack, an invisible hand pushing me back, but I couldn't move. I mean, what is she even going to do with the money now? It's sitting there in that trust fund, gathering dust, and she can't even hear me when I ask her a simple question about a transfer. The doctor said the hearing loss might be permanent. Can you believe our luck? We are basically her full-time caretakers, but Arthur won't even discuss pulling out some of the principal to fund my new office space. He's such a coward when it comes to his mother's precious legacy. I shut my eyes. The legacy. George's legacy. My security. She was talking about my money. Then came the second shot. The one meant for my son. And honestly, it's not like he's worth the trouble. You know Arthur. He's so focused on his precious job and his ethics. He's no fun, Celeste. He's frigid. I told him he should start taking some male enhancement supplements, but he just laughed. Said he's stressed. Stress. Please. He's useless in bed, too. Can't last longer than 2 minutes, even when he's trying to impress. If it weren't for the future, this house, the investment portfolio, I'd have traded him in for an upgrade years ago. The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent whoosh. Useless in bed. Traded him in. The venom in her voice was absolute. This wasn't the gentle, concerned Serafina. This was a predator, coldly assessing her assets. I leaned against the door, my legs suddenly weak. My son, my Arthur, my earnest, hard-working boy, was being mocked, despised, and used. He was a meal ticket, a vehicle for her to claim what she truly wanted, the money George and I had worked for. And I, the old witch, was the last, deaf barrier. My initial thought, the motherly instinct, was to burst through the door, to scream her name, to defend my son, to expose her for the viper she was. But a second thought, slow, cold, and calculating, stopped me dead. If I revealed my hearing now, what would happen? Serafina would deny everything. She would cry. She would throw a theatrical fit, pointing to the weeks of notes she'd written and the care she'd given. She would likely say that the concussion had made me paranoid, delusional. She would paint me as a confused, sick old woman, and Arthur, blinded by his own denial and perhaps a lingering hope for a normal marriage, would be forced to choose. And I had no physical proof, nothing but my word against hers. I would lose my secret weapon, my advantage. I would go from a deaf observer to a discredited liar. I could not afford to lose this fight. Not for myself, but for George's honor. And for the son who was too naive to see the knife his wife held to his throat. I tiptoed back to my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, a strange mix of profound grief and ice-cold clarity washing over me. I climbed back under the covers and closed my eyes, forcing my body to relax, to assume the posture of a sleeping, harmless deaf woman. I was a spy in my own home. When I heard Serafina hang up and her footsteps coming towards my room, I gave a soft, theatrical cough, as if waking up. She pushed the door open gently, her face instantly shifting into the familiar, concerned mask. She walked over to the whiteboard, picked up the dry erase marker, and scrawled a note with a practiced, loving smile. "Good morning, dearest Eleanor. Did you sleep well, T?" I looked at her, nodded slowly, and gave her the softest, most serene smile I could muster. I pointed to the T and then tapped my ear, shrugging, pretending to be utterly unaware of the world. I was a master actress now. I let her think I was still the frail, silent, harmless obstacle. But from that moment on, I wasn't just hearing Serafina and Arthur. I was recording them. I knew exactly what I needed now. Not a confrontation, not tears. I needed proof. I needed a recording that would not just expose her to Arthur, but utterly and completely shatter her entire life, her reputation, and her financial schemes. I had one small advantage: my old, beloved, almost forgotten hobby of ham radio and electronics. George and I used to build things together, tiny gadgets, listening devices just for fun. Hidden away in the back of my closet, in a moth-eaten canvas bag, was a miniature audio recorder I had helped George build years ago, a prototype he'd never finished. A device small enough to be hidden in a house filled with sticky notes and whiteboards. I looked at Serafina as she poured my tea, her back to me, her hand brushing the corner of a photograph of Arthur and me from his high school graduation. Her face was already slipping back into its usual, bored contempt. She's going to pay for this, I thought, and the tea in my mug suddenly felt warm and empowering. The game had changed, and the old woman who couldn't hear was about to become the puppet master. My revenge would be a long, slow brew, served on a day that would guarantee the maximum audience and the most devastating impact. I just had to wait for the perfect moment. I would wait for Serafina's big public event, the one she had been planning for months, the one that would showcase her success to the entire town. Her grand opening of the new exclusive real estate office she'd been building with Arthur's money. That would be the stage for my final act. But before that day, I had work to do. I had to fix the small recorder, place it perfectly, and make sure it captured everything that lay beneath the surface of their perfect life. The recording was the key to my freedom, the key to protecting Arthur, and the final sweet note of my justice. And it all started with finding that old canvas bag and the tiny silver-cased recorder. The next part of the story, my friends, is all about the mechanics of a quiet, old-school surveillance operation. It's about turning a harmless knitting needle into a powerful antenna, and a little old lady's empty hours into a digital trap. This is where I start building my evidence. The world outside my little room was loud again, but I was the only one who knew it. For 3 days after my hearing returned, I moved with the silent, practiced grace of a seasoned hunter. Serafina and Arthur didn't suspect a thing. They saw Eleanor, the poor deaf mother, nodding politely, taking her pills on time, and spending her afternoons reading a worn copy of Gone with the Wind. But Eleanor was gone. In her place was a woman with the keen ears of a fox and the focus of a jeweler. I was watching everything, collecting information not just with my ears, but with my eyes, taking inventory of their routine, and more importantly, their weaknesses. The immediate problem was surveillance. I needed proof, not just memory. Serafina and Arthur spent most of their time in the main living areas, the kitchen, the dining room, and the home office where Arthur kept the joint financial records, the ones she was clearly hungry for. The tiny recording device, a relic from George's workbench, was my target. It was the only thing I trusted. On the 4th night, after Serafina had finished her nightly social media update, the one where she posted a picture of my uneaten dinner with the caption, "Caring for my sweet Eleanor, a true labor of love," and Arthur had gone upstairs, exhausted, I began my operation. I waited until the house was absolutely silent, a deep, suburban quiet only broken by the distant siren of a police car, a sound I could now clearly hear and cherish. I gently eased my bedroom door shut, making sure the old latch didn't click. My room was still dark, lit only by the faint glow of the street lamp filtering through the brick wall-facing window. I felt around in the back of my small closet, pushing aside old winter coats and a box of George's fishing lures until my hand wrapped around the familiar rough canvas bag. It was heavier than I remembered. I pulled it out onto the bed, opening the drawstring slowly. Inside, nestled among wires, soldering irons, and a small coil of copper, was the ES-10 Silver Moth, George's pet name for the miniature digital voice recorder. It was about the size of my thumb, cased in brushed silver, with a barely visible switch and a tiny, almost microscopic pinhole microphone. George had built it to record his own thoughts and ideas when he was out fishing, before smartphones became ubiquitous. It was powered by a specialized, rechargeable battery. I picked up the small charging dock, a round disc with 2 metal prongs. The charging cable was missing. I frowned in the darkness. Without power, it was useless. My brain, rusty with years of domesticity, clicked into gear. I needed to improvise. The charging dock required a low-voltage DC current. I couldn't just plug it into the wall. I remembered an old cordless phone charger I used to keep for George's landline phone, which was now collecting dust in the kitchen junk drawer, the one Serafina rarely bothered to clean out. The kitchen. That was dangerous territory. It was right next to Arthur and Serafina's master bedroom, and the floorboards in the hallway were notoriously creaky, a sound I had only just become aware of. I decided to wait for morning. The next day, Serafina was busy preparing for a huge open house event for one of her listings, a major sale that she constantly reminded Arthur was going to finally put her on the... She spent the morning on her laptop, her voice buzzing with excitement and an undertone of anxiety. I played my part perfectly. I sat in my armchair, the same old novel in my hands, occasionally raising my head to give her a vacant, gentle smile. When she glanced at me, I would lift the book slightly as if to say, "Don't mind me, dear. I'm just a quiet, harmless presence." Around noon, she left, slamming the front door with unnecessary force. "Don't leave the house, Eleanor! And write a note if you need anything. I'll be back at 5. She had scrawled on the whiteboard, her handwriting impatient and rushed. My window of opportunity. I moved quickly. I went straight to the dreaded junk drawer. It was a chaotic mess of rubber bands, dry markers, old receipts, and unused keys. Deep in the back, under a pile of tangled cables, I found it. The old black cordless phone base. I didn't need the base. I needed the small black power adapter that connected it to the wall socket. I unplugged it, quickly checking the voltage. DC 4.5V. Perfect. Back in my room, I set the charging operation in motion. I used the tiny wire cutters from George's kit to snip the end off the phone charger cable, exposing the red and black wires. I carefully stripped the plastic coating with a razor blade. I knew I needed to connect these to the prongs on the ES10 charging dock. It was a tedious, delicate job for my old eyes, but my hands, trained by years of knitting and careful sewing, remained steady. I used 2 small pieces of aluminum foil, salvaged from a forgotten sandwich wrapper in my trash bin, to bridge the connection between the exposed wires and the dock's prongs. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. I plugged the phone charger into the wall socket. A tiny, steady red light glowed on the dock. I carefully placed the silver moth onto the dock. A blue LED blinked. It was charging. A silent cheer went up in my heart. The little silver thumb was coming back to life. I spent the next 2 hours going over the mechanics. The silver moth was simple, a single switch for record and play. It had a memory capacity that George had expanded years ago, enough for almost 48 hours of continuous, high-quality audio. Crucially, the light that indicated it was recording was almost invisible, and I covered it completely with a tiny speck of black marker just to be safe. Now came the real challenge: placement. The recorder had to be close enough to capture their whispers, but completely hidden from Serafina's meticulous, suspicious eyes. I needed a central location that was not only acoustically good, but also easily accessible to me when I needed to retrieve the evidence. I walked the house, playing the role of the wandering, disoriented old lady should anyone catch me. I lingered in the living room, listening. Their favorite place for private talk was the dining room. It had high ceilings and was far enough from the television, yet still open to the kitchen, where Serafina often ranted on her phone. In the dining room, there was a beautiful large grandfather clock, a wedding gift to George and me. Serafina had insisted on moving it from my old house, not for its sentimental value, but because it looked classic in her modern space. I walked over to it, touching the polished wood. The clock was tall, imposing, and silent. Serafina had never bothered to wind it, claiming the ticking bothered her. I saw the perfect spot. Just above the clock face, inside the ornate wooden casing, there was a small, hollow space used for stabilizing the mechanism. It was completely obscured by the scrollwork on the door, but how to place it and retrieve it without being seen? I needed a system. I remembered an old magnetic pin holder from my sewing basket. If I glued the silver moth to a strong magnet, I could simply stick it to the metal frame inside the clock, and use a second magnet on a long, thin stick to retrieve it, all without needing to open the lockable glass door of the clock itself. I carefully glued the recorder to a rare earth magnet I found in George's bag. I took a moment to test the placement, carefully slipping the magnet with the recorder into the clock housing. It clicked instantly into place, perfectly hidden, facing the center of the room. The recorder was now a part of the house, ready to listen. I decided on a deployment strategy. I would turn it on, place it, and leave it running for 2 days. Enough time for the battery and enough time to capture the essential nastiness. I would retrieve it on Sunday morning when both Arthur and Serafina usually slept late. The next morning, a Friday, Serafina was in a foul mood. Her open house had been a disaster, and she was pacing the kitchen, speaking in a low, furious tone on the phone. I seized the moment. I walked slowly into the dining room, my movements stiff and hesitant, mimicking the slow steps of a truly infirm person. Serafina glanced over, saw me, and immediately ended her call with a sharp, "Gotta go." "The old lady is stirring." She scribbled a note on the whiteboard. "Eleanor, what is it?" "I'm busy," I ignored the note. I pretended to struggle to breathe, my hand going to my chest. I pointed at the grandfather clock and then to my wrist, making a confused, pathetic gesture as if I was asking, "What time is it?" "Why isn't the clock working?" Serafina rolled her eyes but forced a weary smile. She walked over to the clock, her face a picture of forced patience. "It's broken, Eleanor." "I told you. It's just for show." As she stood there blocking the view from the kitchen, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, my hand trembling slightly, and flipped the tiny record switch on the silver moth. The micro recorder gave an almost imperceptible single. Tiny vibration against my fingertips, my confirmation that it was working. Serafina turned back towards the kitchen to grab her coffee. In that fraction of a second, my hand darted out. The silver moth, now a magnetic predator, clicked onto the metal frame inside the clock's upper housing. It was hidden. It was listening. I turned back to Serafina, giving her a look of childlike confusion, tapping my ear again. She simply sighed, rolled her eyes when she thought I couldn't see, and wrote on the whiteboard, 10:30 a.m. Go rest, Eleanor. "You look tired." I walked back to my room, not tired, but energized. The silence that had once been a cage was now a protective veil. For the next 48 hours, the grandfather clock would not just mark the time. It would record the truth. I settled into my chair, picked up my novel, and waited for the silver moth to gather its harvest. What I didn't realize then was how quickly that harvest would ripen. The very next day, a Saturday, Arthur was home, and Serafina, frustrated by her failed open house, was ready to pick a fight, and what I heard from the silent clock confirmed my darkest fears about the true nature of their partnership and the massive scale of their financial plan against me. I was not just a burden. I was their next major transaction. The silver moth was humming its silent song inside the grandfather clock. For me, Saturday was usually the quietest, most agonizing day of the week. The day Arthur was home, yet still completely inaccessible, usually buried in work or glued to the television. But this Saturday, the silence of my deafness was a strategic advantage. I sat in my room, ostensibly absorbed in my book, but my senses were straining through the walls, eager to hear the sounds that the miniature recorder was now capturing with unflinching fidelity. Around noon, the muffled sounds of an argument drifted up to my room. Serafina's voice was high-pitched and sharp, Arthur's low and defensive. The volume of their dispute was louder than usual, which meant they were starting in the kitchen, right beneath the air vent. I got up, feigning a need for water, and walked slowly down the hall, settling into my armchair in the living room, strategically positioned about 15 feet from the dining room where the clock stood guard. "I'm telling you." "Arthur, you have to talk to her," Serafina spat, her voice laced with the kind of calculated impatience that always grated on my nerves. I could picture her leaning across the marble countertop, her eyes narrowed. Arthur's voice was thick with weary frustration. "Talk to her about what, Serafina? She just had a serious head injury. She's still recovering and she can't hear a thing. You want me to wave an affidavit under her nose while she's in this state?" "Don't be deliberately obtuse," she hissed. "The state is irrelevant. She's deaf, not demented. She can still sign." The lawyer, Mr. Thompson, said a simple, durable power of attorney would let us move her trust funds into the joint investment account. We could then use that capital to open the second office in Mount Pleasant, just like we planned. The blood drained from my face. Power of attorney. This wasn't just about accessing some cash for her office. This was about absolute, total control over every penny George and I had saved. The joint investment account was the key. Once my money was mingled with theirs, it would be a legal nightmare to separate. They weren't just planning to spend my money. They were planning to erase my financial independence, leaving me entirely at their mercy. Arthur sighed, a sound of utter defeat. "The trust is in her name, Serafina." "And what about the house?" "She's still got the deed to the property in Savannah." I stiffened. "The Savannah property?" That was the one asset I had managed to keep separate. The small, quiet beach cottage that was supposed to be my true sanctuary when I finally couldn't handle the city anymore. It was worth a substantial amount. Oh, the shack? Serafina scoffed. It's a distraction. That place needs $500,000 in repairs. We should pressure her to sign that over to us, too. We could flip it for a considerable profit. Call it a family investment while she's still, She paused for dramatic effect. Lucid enough to sign the papers without contest. A wave of profound, gut-wrenching realization hit me. I wasn't just an inconvenience. I was a living, breathing asset that needed to be liquidated before I recovered. They were running a quiet race against the return of my hearing, against the return of my autonomy. We can't just force her, Serafina, Arthur argued weakly. She's my mother. There has to be a softer way. Softer? Arthur, you are almost 45. When are you going to stop acting like a sentimental schoolboy? She gave us the Charleston House money, remember? She was happy to do it. We just need to convince her this new step is for her own security. We'll tell her the current trust is too volatile, too complicated for her to manage, especially now. I felt a cold, furious heat rising in my chest. Security. They used that word like a cudgel. We need the cash now, Arthur. The Mount Pleasant lease won't hold. We need to close the deal by the end of the month. Your mother's power of attorney is the only way to get the capital without you having to mortgage your future. Think about us, Arthur. Think about our legacy. Her words cut through the air. Legacy. Her legacy, built on my ruin. Arthur remained silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low I had to strain to hear it, even with the clock recorder humming mere feet away. Fine. I'll draft the power of attorney and the quitclaim deed for the Savannah property. But I'm going to need Thompson to come to the house, and you are going to be nothing but supportive and sweet, Serafina. No pressure. Absolutely none. Do you understand? Perfectly, she purred, the sweetness returning to her tone like a snake shedding its skin. I'll get the herbal tea ready, darling. The one that helps with her nerves. The argument ended. The silence that followed was terrifying. They had set a deadline. They were calling the lawyer. They were going to make their move on me soon. I sat motionless, forcing my face to hold that vacant, gentle smile, my eyes fixed on my book. Serafina walked into the living room, saw me, and stopped. She pulled out her phone, snapped a quick photo of me looking peaceful with the book, and then scribbled a note on the whiteboard by the kitchen door. Arthur will be home all day, Eleanor. Enjoy the peace. Love, S. I gave her a small, grateful nod. She had no idea the peace I was enjoying was the sound of her financial treachery. Later that afternoon, I realized the full extent of Serafina's manipulation of Arthur. I was resting in my room when I heard Serafina's voice, this time in the master bedroom upstairs speaking to Arthur. I could only hear snippets through the ceiling and the pipes, but it was enough. No, honey, I did remind her. She keeps forgetting to sign the life insurance beneficiary change. It's just a formality, transferring the balance to you from George's name. Life insurance. My own life insurance policy, which I had clearly designated to be split between a small environmental charity and Arthur. And honestly, Arthur, those little checks she keeps getting from her annuity, they should just go straight into our account. Why make the mailman bring 10 different envelopes? She doesn't even know they're coming anymore, the way she... Serafina's voice trailed off, replaced by a soft, cold laugh. My hands clenched the sheets. It wasn't just the large assets they were after. They were nibbling away at the edges, pilfering my small monthly incomes, reorganizing my death. They were systematically dismantling Eleanor Hayes, piece by financial piece. And Arthur, my son, was either too blind, too weak, or too complicit to stop her. The thought that Arthur might be knowingly participating in this betrayal twisted the knife. I needed to act, and I needed to do it immediately. My priority was threefold. Secure the assets. I had to protect the trust funds and the Savannah property before Thompson. The lawyer showed up, amassed the evidence. I needed more recordings, especially one confirming the lawyer's involvement and the date of the signing. The counter plan. I needed a distraction. A way to move money and alter documentation without them knowing. First, the funds. I had my old laptop, a bulky machine George had customized for me. Serafina had never bothered with it, assuming I used the tablet she'd bought me for entertainment. That evening, after dinner, I waited until Serafina was streaming a movie with Arthur. I locked my door and placed a thick blanket against the gap under the door to muffle any sound. I booted up the old machine. The glow of the screen was blindingly bright in the dark room. I still had the passwords, carefully recorded in a cipher that only George and I knew, hidden inside the lining of my favorite old purse. I logged into my bank accounts. The trust fund was thankfully still intact, but the power of attorney could change everything in a flash. I had to create a fortress around the assets. I remembered a technique George had taught me years ago, a CDA, conditional distribution agreement. It was a complex, self-executing contract, where a significant sum of money would be automatically transferred out of the trust to a designated beneficiary if a specific legal trigger, like an unauthorized POA, was activated. I couldn't risk transferring all the funds now, as the sheer size of the transaction would send an instant alert to the bank, and thus to Arthur. But I could transfer the key. I opened a new small bank account at a local credit union that Serafina wouldn't be checking, putting a nominal amount in it, just enough to activate the account. I then set up a complex CDA that would move 85% of my main trust fund to this new credit union account, the moment the bank received and processed a power of attorney or a quitclaim deed involving my name. I labeled the new account beneficiary as the George and Eleanor Hayes Charitable Foundation. A small lie for a greater good. The key was the trigger. The moment they thought they had won, the assets would vanish. The most difficult move was protecting the Savannah property. I couldn't transfer the deed, but I could encumber it. I quickly found a small local lender specializing in short-term secured loans. Using the remaining 15% of the trust capital that I didn't put under the CDA, I took out a small, short-term secured loan against the Savannah property's title. The paperwork was immediate, and the lien, while small, was now publicly recorded. They couldn't get a clear title to flip it without paying off the unexpected new debt. This would be a massive, immediate headache for them. I closed the laptop just as I heard Arthur and Serafina coming up the stairs. The whole operation had taken less than an hour, but my hands were shaking violently. I had bought myself time. The fortress was built. The next morning, Sunday, I retrieved the silver moth from the clock. I waited until I heard the shower running in the master bathroom. Serafina always took a long time getting ready. I slipped into the dining room, retrieved the recorder with my magnetic stick, and hurried back to my room, plugging in the tiny device to a speaker. I listened to the raw audio from the clock. I heard the terrible, undeniable truth of their plans, Arthur's weakness, and Serafina's cruel contempt. It was all there. The POA, the Savannah property, the lucid enough to sign comment. And then, at the very end of the recording, I heard Serafina's clear voice talking to Thompson on speakerphone. "Yes, Michael. Tuesday afternoon. Perfect. We'll get the old lady to sign everything then. Arthur says she's having a good day. Yes, I'll have the tea ready. We need this to look simple and quiet. Thank you, Thompson. You're a dear. Tuesday." I had 2 days. 2 days to perfect my plan and to finalize the final public stage of my revenge. The recording was the bomb. The grand opening of Serafina's new real estate office was about to become my launch pad. I had a deadline, Tuesday afternoon. That was when Michael Thompson, the lawyer, was scheduled to arrive with the power of attorney and the quitclaim deed for the Savannah property. I had 2 days to ensure my defense was airtight, my trap was invisible, and my final revenge was perfectly orchestrated. The power of attorney meant more than just the money. It meant they could commit me to a home, liquidate my assets, and control every aspect of my life. I couldn't risk the confrontation happening at the dining room table. The entire performance had to be moved to my territory. Monday was spent in silent preparation, a day Serafina interpreted as Eleanor's growing confusion. She noticed me rearranging my room. I moved my favorite old wooden rocking chair, a bulky piece directly in front of the window, blocking the view outside. I also moved the small, heavy antique side table right next to it. Serafina scribbled a frustrated note. "Eleanor, why did you move the furniture? It's much safer over here." I merely smiled vacantly, pointed to the window, and gave a tired shrug, suggesting I just wanted to see the light better. Serafina sighed, gave up, and went back to organizing her grand opening guest list, a party set for the following Saturday. She was so focused on her future triumph that she missed the meticulous construction of my trap. The most critical part of my preparation was ensuring Arthur and Serafina's complacency. They had to believe I was incapable of resistance. On Monday evening, I started my new routine. I began forgetting things deliberately. I put my pill container in the silverware drawer. I pointed vaguely at the television and asked Serafina in a loud, confused voice, my first spoken word since my hearing returned, "Is that George?" When a commercial came on, she and Arthur exchanged a worried, confirming glance, a look that said, "She's deteriorating faster than we thought. Better get those papers signed quickly." This theatrical confusion secured my Tuesday audience. The final piece of the puzzle was the video evidence. The audio from the silver moth was damning, but a video showing their faces, their hands guiding mine, and their whispered instructions would be legally indisputable. I had another electronic relic, George's old clunky camcorder. It was large and outdated, but the image quality was excellent, and it recorded to a removable memory card. It was too big to hide in the clock, but my newly arranged furniture provided the perfect solution. The wooden rocking chair had a high, ornate back. I carefully used a tiny screwdriver to loosen a decorative wooden slat on the side of the chair's backrest. It created a narrow, diagonal gap, just wide enough for the camcorder's lens to peer through. I padded the interior with soft cotton wool to muffle the sound of the camera's whirring, and secured the camcorder inside the chair with strong duct tape. I angled the lens to capture the side table where the power of attorney would be signed. The chair was now a completely silent, fully operational surveillance booth. On Tuesday morning, I was ready. I woke up with a steely calm I hadn't felt in years. I turned on the camcorder, a single, bright red light blinking briefly before I secured the back panel, and then I waited in the rocking chair, a picture of frail, bewildered anticipation. At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. Serafina, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, hurried to the door. "Arthur, he's here. Remember the plan. Quiet, supportive, and absolutely no pressure," she whispered urgently to Arthur, who looked pale and ill at ease. I heard every word clearly, the evidence piling up, even without the silver moth, which I had thankfully retrieved. Michael Thompson was a smooth, middle-aged man with a slicked-back hairstyle and the kind of practiced, weary charm common to corporate lawyers. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy with my fate. Serafina brought him into the living room, but I stopped them with a confused gesture. I pointed dramatically to my side table, then to the brightly lit, camcorder-equipped rocking chair. I mimed that the sunlight was better there. "She wants to sign by the window, Arthur," Serafina sighed, forcing a smile for Thompson. "The light, you know. Poor thing." They set up the signing station on my small antique side table, right next to the rocking chair. Thompson spread the documents, the power of attorney for the main trust and the quitclaim deed for the Savannah property, and took out his expensive fountain pen. Arthur hovered awkwardly. Serafina turned to me, her smile now fixed, and her voice deliberately gentle and slow, as if speaking to a child. I watched her lips move, every word a deliberate lie. "Eleanor, dear, Arthur and I are just trying to make things easier for you. Now that you're tired, these papers are to make sure we can handle the paperwork for your investments, so you don't have to worry about the numbers anymore. It's for your own security, darling." I nodded vacantly, my eyes wide and slightly unfocused. I pointed to the power of attorney document. Thompson, clearly eager to conclude the matter, pushed the paper towards me. "Just your signature here, Mrs. Hayes. Nice and clear." It's a very simple formality. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly, partly acting, partly genuine nerves. I slowly lowered the pen toward the signature line, hovering over the spot that would grant them legal carte blanche over my life. Serafina leaned in close, whispering conspiratorially, her hand resting on my shoulder in a possessive grip, a perfect shot for the hidden camera. "Don't worry, darling. Once this is done, you can truly relax. We can finally get the capital we need." Just as the pen was about to touch the paper, I stopped. I looked up at Serafina with eyes that were no longer vacant, but clear, sharp, and terrifyingly intelligent. "I won't be signing that." "Serafina," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and perfectly articulated. The sudden clarity, the sound of my voice, hit the room like a sonic boom. Serafina froze. Her smile shattered. Thompson dropped his pen. Arthur looked like he had been slapped. "Mom? You're hearing?" Arthur stammered, his face white. Serafina's eyes were darting wildly, a trapped animal's panic replacing her professional composure. "Eleanor, what did you say? Are you feeling all right? The concussion, perhaps?" I cut her off, my voice rising in volume, no longer Eleanor the victim, but Eleanor the judge. I said I won't be signing, because I can hear every single word you've been saying about me and my son for the last week. I heard you call me the old witch. I heard you mock Arthur's efforts to please you. And I heard you tell your sister that you only married him for the future, meaning the money George and I worked for. Serafina found her voice, high and screeching. "That's a lie! You're sick, Eleanor. Arthur, she's delusional!" The doctor said the hearing loss was temporary, Serafina, and it returned 4 days ago. 4 days ago, I heard you tell Arthur that you needed this power of attorney to liquidate the asset, meaning my Savannah cottage, and that once I was lucid enough to sign, you would empty my trust fund to fund your legacy. I looked directly at Thompson, who was visibly sweating. "Mr. Thompson, you are complicit in attempting to secure a signature under duress from an alleged invalid. The moment this power of attorney is signed, a conditional distribution agreement I set up yesterday will automatically transfer 85% of my trust's principal to an offshore credit union account in the name of a private charitable foundation. This power of attorney will be worthless, and you, sir, will be the subject of a massive malpractice suit." Thompson immediately recoiled, stuffing the documents back into his briefcase. "Mrs. Hayes, I was simply acting on your son's request. I had no prior knowledge of any duress." Arthur finally found his courage, but he directed it at Serafina, his face a mask of shock and wounded rage. "Is that true, Serafina? Did you call her the old witch? Did you tell Celeste you'd trade me in?" Serafina ignored him, her eyes fixed on me, a look of pure, murderous hatred replacing the panic. She lunged for the documents. "This is insane! You can't do this!" I was faster. I picked up the power of attorney document, held it up for the hidden camera in the rocking chair, and then, slowly, deliberately, I tore the paper in half. The sound of the paper ripping was deeply, wonderfully satisfying. "The trust is safe, Serafina. The Savannah property is now encumbered with a lien. Good luck selling a cloudy title before your office opening." "And Arthur," I turned to my son, tears finally blurring my vision. "I had to let you hear her own words to save you. You are a good man, but she doesn't love you. She only loves the money. And you, Michael Thompson, are dismissed." Thompson practically fled the house. Serafina stood there, her hands twitching, her entire world of financial control crumbling around her. I had won the first battle, but the war for her reputation, the public exposure, was yet to come. The grand opening was still scheduled for Saturday, and I had all the audio and video I needed for a devastating presentation. I had the recordings of the power of attorney discussion, her insults, and the video of her trying to coerce my signature. The time for the private family confrontation was over. Now it was time for public, irrevocable ruin. I looked at Serafina and smiled. A genuine, victorious smile. She had no idea the rocking chair was still recording. The chaos that followed Thompson's hasty departure was biblical. Serafina immediately abandoned her pretense of professionalism. The moment the front door slammed, she spun on me, her carefully manicured features contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "You senile old fool. You think this is over?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She looked around, her eyes wild, searching for a defense, for a way to undo what had just happened. "You tore up a piece of paper. We'll just draft another one. You can't hide the money forever." Arthur, however, was in a state of shattered silence. He stood rigid, watching his wife, his face a sickening mix of disbelief and betrayal. He looked like the little boy who had just seen his favorite toy broken beyond repair. "The money is safe, Serafina," I said calmly, my voice steady. I felt an incredible reserve of strength, drawn from the years of silence and the triumph of the moment. "And there will be no more papers. I have terminated Michael Thompson's services, and the bank is now on alert." "You have nothing." Serafina laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Nothing? I have your son, Eleanor. I have his name, his home, and half of everything he earns. And you? You are still an invalid living in my house." I looked past her to Arthur, who finally stirred, shaking his head slowly. "You're wrong, Serafina," Arthur said, his voice flat and devastatingly hollow. "It's over." Serafina turned to him, her eyes flashing. "Over? Are you actually siding with your demented mother over me? After everything I've done for you?" "You did nothing for me," Arthur said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You did everything for my bank account." I heard her, Serafina. Every word. "You said I was cheap. You said I was useless in bed. You said you'd trade me in." His voice broke on the last few words. The raw, genuine pain in his tone was the one thing that pierced through my victorious calm. This was my son, finally seeing the truth. Serafina saw her primary asset slipping away. She immediately shifted tactics, trying to salvage the wreckage. "Arthur, darling, you know I was just venting. That was Celeste. We were joking. I was stressed about the open house. You know I love you." "Your mother is sick, Arthur." "She's hallucinating. She's projecting." She rushed towards him, trying to grab his hand, but Arthur recoiled, stepping back against the wall. The lawyer was here for a power of attorney. Serafina. That wasn't a joke. That was a calculated move to steal my mother's final security. You wanted to drain the entire fund. And the Savannah deed. You called the cottage a shack that needed to be flipped for your office. I heard it all, too. Arthur's eyes were cold. The years of suppressing his own instincts, of trying to believe the polished lie, had finally snapped. Serafina's beautiful face crumpled into a mask of theatrical tears. She began to sob, loud, dry sobs, throwing her hands over her face. "This is monstrous. She's turning you against me. After I cared for her for 3 weeks, fed her, wrote her notes. You're both vile." I watched the performance, noting the lack of tears and the slight gap between her fingers that allowed her to observe Arthur's reaction. The camera saw it. "Serafina," I stated simply. She stopped sobbing immediately. Her head shot up, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Camera? What camera?" I pointed a calm, steady finger at the antique wooden rocking chair by the window. "The one George and I rigged years ago. It's recording right now. It saw you leaning over me, whispering coercion. It saw you try to snatch the papers. And it saw Thompson flee. It's all on the memory card." The air left her body. The terror that flashed in her eyes was genuine this time. A recorded video, showing her intent and lack of remorse, was a legal and professional catastrophe. She lunged toward the chair, a desperate, animalistic cry escaping her lips. But Arthur, driven by a fury I had never seen, moved faster. He caught her by the arm, gripping her tightly. "Don't touch my mother's things," he yelled, pushing her back. "You've done enough damage." Serafina stumbled back, her eyes flicking between me, Arthur, and the rocking chair, her mind calculating the damage. She knew the game was up. The financial scheme was blocked, her husband was gone, and the evidence was secured. She straightened up, suddenly regaining a cold composure. The actress was back, but this time the script was one of icy withdrawal. "Fine," she whispered, her voice dangerously low. "Keep your pathetic money, Eleanor. You've ruined your own son's future for a few pathetic dollars. And Arthur? You are a weak fool, just like I told Celeste. You will regret throwing away the only woman who had ambition for you." She then turned and walked silently out of the living room, heading straight for the staircase. Arthur looked at me, his face etched with pain. "Mom, I need to go. I need to be alone." "Go, Arthur," I said softly. "You need to decide what kind of man you want to be, the one who enables or the one who is free." He nodded, a single tear tracing a line down his cheek, and followed Serafina upstairs. I heard the muffled sounds of a suitcase being dragged across the floor. Serafina was leaving, but I knew this wasn't the end. The final stage of my revenge had to be public. Her professional reputation was her true asset, and I intended to liquidate it. I waited until the house went completely silent, confirming Serafina had left. Then I went to the rocking chair, retrieved the memory card from the camcorder, and played the footage back on my old laptop. The video was perfect, clear, close-up, and damning. Thompson's nervous fidgeting, Serafina's coercive whisper, Arthur's horrified reaction, and her final venomous retreat. Now, it was time to move from defense to offense. My target was Serafina's grand opening party, Saturday. The very event she had been planning to celebrate her Mount Pleasant expansion, financed by my ruined trust fund. First, I reached out to a contact. Years ago, George and I had befriended a young, ambitious investigative reporter named Daniel Vance, who covered local politics and business ethics. He had always been grateful for a story George had once tipped him off to. I found his old business card and sent him a cryptic email from an anonymous account, titled, "Exclusive Video Evidence of Real Estate Fraud and Elder Abuse Regarding Serafina Hayes." I attached the most damning audio clips from the Silver Moth, the ones where she discusses the POA, the shack, and her contempt for Arthur. I also made a call to my bank's personal trust manager, a woman named Ms. Evans, explaining the situation in detail and confirming the POA attempt. She was horrified and promised full cooperation. I then transferred a substantial amount of the protected trust fund, enough to secure my immediate independence, into the new credit union account. I left Arthur a generous portion in the main fund, just enough to show my love, but not enough for Serafina to ever touch again. The final element of the plan involved the party itself. Serafina's grand opening was being held at her new office space, a large, modern location in the affluent Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Exactly the kind of place where Charleston's elite property owners and prospective clients would gather. I needed access, and I needed a technical setup. I called an old friend from George's ham radio club, a man named Howard. He ran a small professional AV rental and setup company for corporate events. "Howard," I said, skipping the small talk. "I need a favor. A big one. I need to rent an industrial-grade projector, a large external screen, and a powerful localized PA system. I need it all set up discreetly at a private event on Saturday night." "Eleanor, you're not planning a surprise movie night, are you?" Howard chuckled. "No, Howard. I'm planning the end of a career, and I'll pay triple your usual rate in cash." Howard, sensing the seriousness in my voice and remembering George's kindness, agreed instantly. We devised a plan for him to set up the equipment under the guise of being the official AV vendor for the party, hired by a disgruntled previous client of Serafina's. With the journalist alerted and the equipment secured, I had one last, crucial conversation. I had to talk to Arthur. He came down later that evening, his face drawn and hollow. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. "She's gone, Mom. Took her bags, her best clothes, and half of the antique china. She said she was going to her sister's in Atlanta to assess her legal options. I told her not to come back." I reached out and took his hand. "Arthur, I am so sorry for the pain you are feeling. But she was a parasite. She would have destroyed you." "I know," he whispered. "But the money, Mom. She got me to believe I deserved all of it. I helped her. I was weak." "You were a son who loved his wife," I corrected him. "But you were also the man who stopped her from stealing the last thing I had." That makes you stronger than you know. Your name is on a significant portion of the funds I secured. It's not everything, but it's enough to start over. And you are a power of attorney for me, but only for my medical care. You can use my old house in Savannah for a fresh start. The lien is small, a placeholder. It can be paid off easily. I then told him about the party. I need you to stay away, Arthur. Seraphina's grand opening is going to be my final word. I need the focus to be entirely on her and the truth. Arthur stared at me, his eyes wide with a new mixture of dread and grudging admiration. You're going to expose her in front of everyone, aren't you? No, Arthur, I said, smiling the cruel, victorious smile of the grand dame who had finally reclaimed her throne. I'm going to let Seraphina Hayes expose herself. Saturday loomed, a day of reckoning. I had the recordings, the venue, and the means to broadcast the truth to the entire Charleston real estate community. My revenge would be cold, public, and irretrievable. The Grand Dame was ready for her final, devastating performance. The week crawled by, each hour a tension wire pulled taut between me and Seraphina's inevitable humiliation. She remained gone, presumably with her sister in Atlanta, plotting her next move and undoubtedly panicking over the frozen assets and the sudden silence from Michael Thompson. Meanwhile, Arthur was handling the divorce papers, a painful but necessary step toward his own freedom. He had moved into a small, rented apartment, unable to bear the weight of the house where he had been so thoroughly betrayed. Eleanor Hayes, was finally returning to my original sanctuary, my old house in the historic district. The papers were signed. Arthur was the temporary executor of my affairs, with the specific instruction that I would take up residence in my former home immediately. I wasn't just leaving their cage. I was reclaiming my life, preparing the final stage of my operation from familiar, beloved ground. Friday arrived, and the final details of my plan clicked into place. Daniel Vance, the investigative reporter, called me on a secure line. Mrs. Hayes, his voice was low and excited. I've cross-referenced the audio clips with the banking alerts. This is solid. The attempted POA, the lien on the Savannah property, it all smells like textbook elder financial abuse. The fact that the target, Seraphina Hayes, is holding a high-profile real estate launch tomorrow. That is a gift. I smiled, a cold, dry feeling of satisfaction spreading through me. I believe in giving the press an exclusive, Mr. Vance. And I believe in public spectacle. And the video? He asked. The video is the grand finale. I will be sending you a secure link tomorrow morning with the key moments of the video, timed to coincide with a special presentation I am arranging for the party. Next, I met with Howard, the AV technician. He was setting up the equipment in Seraphina's new Mount Pleasant office space under the guise of an official media launch setup. The office was a monument to Seraphina's ruthless ambition. Sleek, minimalist, and utterly devoid of soul. It's done. Eleanor, Howard murmured, handing me a small, specialized remote control encased in heavy black plastic. We were standing in a secluded service entrance, far from the bustling party preparations. The projector is mounted in the ceiling recess, perfectly hidden. The screen is a massive retractable one built into the far wall. They think it's for listing presentations. And the PA system is live and integrated with the main soundboard. One click of this remote, and the official music dies, the screen drops, and your video plays through every speaker in the building, including the outdoor patio. I gripped the remote. It felt small, powerful, and utterly decisive. Thank you, Howard. You've done an honorable thing. I'm just glad to help George's widow serve some justice, he replied, giving me a knowing nod before he vanished back into the chaos. Saturday dawned, the day of the grand opening. The air in Charleston was humid and thick with the smell of jasmine and anticipation. I dressed with meticulous care, not in the drab clothes I had worn as the invalid, but in a sharp dove-gray linen suit, a classic piece I hadn't worn since George's funeral, and a string of genuine pearls. I pinned my silver hair up severely. I wasn't going as the victim. I was going as the grande dame, the rightful owner of the dignity they had tried to steal. I drove my old, well-maintained sedan to the Mount Pleasant location, parking several blocks away and walking the final stretch. I wanted to make an entrance, but one that was timed precisely for maximum impact. The office space was teeming with people: real estate rivals, prominent clients, local bankers, and media personalities. Serafina, who had clearly flown back at the last minute, stood near the entrance, radiant and predatory in a brilliant sapphire blue dress. She was talking and laughing, holding a glass of champagne, the picture of professional success. She was completely unaware that the very equipment projecting her name onto the wall was my personal weapon. I entered the main hall exactly 30 minutes into the reception, just as the official presentation was scheduled to begin. I didn't need to hear Serafina's voice. I saw the expression on her face as she spotted me across the crowded room. Her jaw dropped. Her champagne glass tilted. The brilliant, practiced smile vanished, replaced by a momentary flash of absolute naked panic. She hadn't anticipated my presence. She had expected me to be either too weak, too deaf, or too confused to leave the house. She quickly regained her composure, her eyes narrowing into a dangerous calculation. She clearly decided I was there to cause a scene, an angry, deaf old woman who could be easily dismissed and removed. Serafina raised her voice, gesturing to an aide. "Security! There is an unwelcome guest here. Please escort this woman out!" Before anyone could move, I began to walk. Slowly, deliberately, I moved through the crowd, my gray suit contrasting sharply with the bright modern room. I ignored Serafina's demand and continued my stately walk toward the raised presentation stage. The crowd parted around me, sensing the profound tension. Serafina stepped onto the stage, her voice tight with forced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please ignore the disturbance. This is merely a family matter. Our presentation is about to begin." I reached the foot of the stage and stopped. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I simply looked up at her, my eyes holding decades of wisdom and the chilling knowledge of her guilt. "No, Serafina," I said, my voice cutting cleanly across the babble of the room. "The presentation has already begun. This is my part." Serafina's face flushed crimson. She moved to the side to address the aide, who was hesitating. "I said get her out of here!" I raised the small black remote control in my hand. It was the only warning she got. I pressed the single large button. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The smooth jazz music that had been filling the room abruptly cut off. A loud electronic whir sliced through the silence as the massive retractable presentation screen dropped down onto the wall behind Serafina. She spun around horrified. The projector, concealed high above, came to life. It didn't project Serafina's logo. Instead, the screen filled with the title card I had prepared on my laptop. The Eleanor Hayes Trust, a Grand Dame's Legacy and the Price of Greed. Serafina lunged for the microphone, her hand trembling. "This is vandalism! Shut this down!" But the powerful PA system was already under my control. A second click of the remote, and the screen flashed to a black background. And then, the audio began to play through every speaker in the room. Loud, clear, and utterly inescapable. It was the chilling. Raw recording from the Silver Moth, the argument from the Saturday before. Serafina's voice, sharp and distinct. The old witch just sits there staring at the wall. We are basically her full-time caretakers, but Arthur won't even discuss pulling out some of the principal to fund my new office space. He's such a coward when it comes to his mother's precious legacy. Arthur's tired voice. "We can't just force her." Serafina purring. "We'll tell her the current trust is too volatile. We need the cash now, Arthur. Your mother's power of attorney is the only way to get the capital without you having to mortgage your future. Think about our legacy." A collective gasp went through the crowded room. The whispers died. Everyone was staring at Serafina, who stood frozen on the stage, her face turning from red to ashen gray. The sound system was high quality. Every malicious word, every calculated lie was delivered with perfect clarity. I looked at the faces in the crowd, the potential investors, the rival agents, the local bank manager. They were horrified. Serafina's perfect professional image was disintegrating in real time, but I wasn't done. The audio shifted abruptly to the conversation about the Savannah property. Serafina's voice, contemptuous. "And what about the house?" "She's still got the deed to the property in Savannah." "The shack? We should pressure her to sign that over to us, too. We could flip it for a considerable profit. Call it a family investment while she's still lucid enough to sign the papers without contest." Serafina finally moved, lunging toward the audio mixer, but the equipment was expertly concealed and locked. Her desperation only confirmed the truth of the recording. Then, the audio cut off, and the screen flashed to the video footage I had taken on Tuesday. It was a close-up, high-definition shot, taken from the rocking chair's vantage point. It showed Serafina, radiant in her navy suit, leaning over me, her voice a poisonous whisper, her hand gripping my shoulder. Serafina's video whisper. "Don't worry, darling. Once this is done, you can truly relax. We can finally get the capital we need." The video cut just as my hand, trembling with staged confusion, was about to touch the pen. It cut, and the screen returned to the simple title card. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terminal. Serafina stood exposed, her sapphire dress now looking less like a symbol of wealth and more like a shroud. A few people began to whisper, pointing their phones at her. Her grand opening was now a crime scene. I heard the subtle sound of multiple camera shutters clicking from the back of the room. Daniel Vance and his colleagues were doing their job. I walked up the steps to the stage, moving with the quiet authority of a queen reclaiming her throne. I paused next to Serafina, who was breathing heavily, her eyes wide with unfixable ruin. I took the microphone from the stand and addressed the room, my voice steady, no longer the deaf old woman, but Eleanor Hayes, the Grand Dame. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, the sound system amplifying my voice to every corner of the room. "This woman is not a respected businesswoman. She is a predator who attempted to bankrupt an elderly woman and commit medical fraud against her own husband. The funds she needed for this beautiful office were locked down moments before she tried to secure a forged power of attorney. This is not a grand opening. This is a crime report, and I suggest you all reassess your relationship with a woman who measures human beings in terms of assets and shacks." I placed the microphone back down and looked at Serafina one last time. The triumph was complete. Her reputation was in ruins, her new office was a mockery, and the money was gone. She had nothing left. I turned and walked off the stage, leaving Serafina alone in the devastating silence of her failed launch. I heard the frantic buzz of activity behind me, Serafina screaming at the aides, the sounds of cameras flashing, and the hurried exit of clients. The police would arrive soon. My final act was complete. But there was one last piece of business to attend to. I had to pay a visit to my son, Arthur, who was now truly free but devastated. And I needed to make a final decision about the Grand Dame's legacy itself. The revenge was served, but the rebuilding had just begun. I walked away from Serafina's ruined grand opening, leaving behind the cacophony of shattered ambitions and flashing cameras. Daniel Vance was already at the stage, cornering the stunned event planner and taking statements from the horrified attendees. My work there was finished. The revenge was a success, delivered publicly and with irrefutable proof. I drove back to my old familiar house. It felt quieter here, safer, the air thick with the memory of George and the comfort of my own decisions. I sank into the sofa, the one I had shared with George for 30 years, and finally allowed the tension of the last week to release its grip. It was over. The next day, Sunday, the news broke like a tsunami. Real estate maven exposed in elder fraud scandal. Video evidence shows coercion at grand opening. Screamed the headlines of the local Charleston papers. Daniel Vance's exclusive dominating the front page. The video, the audio, the attempted POA, it was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Serafina Hayes was not just ruined. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale overnight. I even read that Michael Thompson, the lawyer, was being investigated by the State Bar Association. My final piece of business was Arthur. He arrived later that morning, knocking tentatively on my door. He looked exhausted, but the vacant confusion had been replaced by a quiet, resolved strength. "Mom," he said, stepping inside. "I saw the news. I saw the video online. It was devastating. But thank you. You saved my life." I hugged him tightly, the first genuine, unburdened hug we'd shared in years. "You saved yourself, Arthur. I just gave you the evidence you needed to believe your own instincts." We sat down, and I showed him the final financial details. The conditional distribution agreement had functioned flawlessly, moving 85% of the principal to a new secure account. "This money is safe, Arthur. The rest, the portion you helped me protect from her final attempt, is yours, free and clear. It's more than enough for you to buy a new small home, pay off your debts, and start fresh. It's a gift from your father and me, given to a son who finally proved his loyalty to the truth." Arthur looked at the figures, tears welling in his eyes again, not of pain, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. "I don't deserve this, Mom, after how blind I was." "You deserve a fresh start, Arthur. And you deserve to be with someone who loves you, not your financial potential. You need to focus on rebuilding your life and your self-respect." I then told him about the fate of the remaining 85% of the trust. The bulk of the money, Arthur, is now formally placed into the Eleanor Hayes Foundation for the Protection of Elderly Autonomy. He looked up, surprised. "A foundation?" "Yes. It will fund legal aid and advocacy for vulnerable seniors who have been targeted by family members seeking financial exploitation. Serafina wanted to build her legacy on my money. I'm going to build a shield for others with it. This is George's true legacy, Arthur." I looked at him, my final instruction clear. "I want you to be on the board of the foundation. I need your sharp, ethical mind to help manage the investment portfolio. It will be your new purpose. You will turn your painful lesson into a mission to protect others." Arthur nodded, a light of genuine purpose dawning in his eyes. "I would be honored, Mom. I'll do it." With my financial future secure and my son set on a path of ethical atonement, I moved to the last item on my mental checklist, Serafina. 2 days later, the divorce papers were served to Serafina at her sister's address. She fought back, of course, attempting to claim half of Arthur's remaining assets, citing emotional distress, but the public scandal and the overwhelming video evidence rendered her claims hollow. Arthur's lawyer easily countersued, using the recordings to establish grounds of coercion, emotional abuse, and financial fraud. The divorce was finalized quickly and brutally. Serafina left with only her personal belongings and a ruined professional license. Her legacy was, quite simply, nothing. I, Eleanor Hayes, settled back into my old life, but it was a life infused with new purpose. I spent my days in the garden, tending George's roses, the sounds of birdsong and the gentle wind in the Spanish moss filling my ears. I was deaf no longer, and the silence that had once been a cage was now a profound, treasured peace. My old house in the historic district became the nerve center of the new foundation. I spent my evenings not reading novels, but poring over case files, advising on legal strategies, and speaking to groups about the dangers of elder financial abuse. I was the grand dame, the survivor, the woman who had fought back from a silent void and won. Life had given me a severe concussion, a period of deafness, and a heartbreaking betrayal. But those setbacks had gifted me something far more valuable: absolute clarity. The clarity to see wolves, the clarity to trust my own ingenuity, and the clarity to serve a revenge that was not about destruction, but about justice and restoration. My story, the one you are listening to now, is my final triumph. It's a reminder that old age is not a disability. It is a shield forged by experience. And when you underestimate the quiet old woman in the corner, you are simply giving her the time and the silence she needs to plot your spectacular downfall. So, listen closely, because even when the world goes silent, the Grande Dame is still listening, and she is always recording.